Hi, I'm Anna, and welcome back to the D3 Audible Cheat Sheets, where we continue with Burgundy. If Chablis is Burgundy's cool climate Chardonnay lesson, the Côte d'Or, Côte Chalonnaise, and Mâconnais are Burgundy's core exam terrain, where tiny differences in site and vintage become real differences in ripeness, tannin maturity, and ultimately the style and quality in the glass. These parts of Burgundy sit in a moderate continental climate. Dijon, at the northern end of the Côte d'Or, is about 500 kilometers from the Mediterranean. Winters are cold, summers are warm, but the key detail is that summers are relatively short. That is exactly why early ripening Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are suitable. If ripening comes too late, you risk underripe tannins, thin flavor, and a vintage that never quite resolves. In the Côte d'Or, the Morvan Hills to the west provide some protection from rainfall. Average annual rainfall is around 700 millimeters. Early autumn is typically dry, but rain can still be a threat at harvest. In the Mâconnais, the climate is typically slightly warmer and drier than the Côte d'Or, which matters because that small shift can improve ripening reliability and create a slightly softer, riper style. Even though the climate is warmer than it was in previous decades, ripening Pinot Noir is still precarious. A cool vintage can still result in underripe tannins in the finished wines. So the viticultural priority becomes very focused. Promote ripeness of skins and seeds. That's not an abstract goal. It's the difference between fine, ripe tannins that support aging and green, astringent tannins that dominate the palate. Because Burgundy is relatively far north, vineyard site and the weather of each vintage are incredibly important for both yield and quality. And that variability creates marked vintage variation, which is why Burgundy producers obsess over site. Now let's talk hazards because Burgundy's hazards are not background, they are decision forcing events. Frost is a major challenge. Spring frosts, if severe, can substantially reduce yields if they occur after budburst. The risk is particularly acute because Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are early budding. And this risk is exacerbated by recent warmer winters that encourage earlier growth, making the vines more vulnerable to frost damage. Then there is hail, which can strike throughout the growing season. Hail in April or May damages early growth, reducing yields or even wiping out the crop. Hail later in the season damages fruit, especially exposed grapes. Unless damaged berries are eliminated, there is a risk of grey rot tainting the wine. This is why sorting tables have played a critical role. They are not a luxury detail, they are a quality safeguard in hail affected vintages. Historically, hail netting was not permitted because it was believed to cause too much shading and look inauthentic in the landscape. But since June 2018, limited use of anti hail netting has been permitted. Beyond nets, a common preventative action is seeding thunderclouds with silver iodide to induce precipitation away from threatened vineyards. Hail tends to be highly localized, but for those affected, the consequences are substantial, both in winemaking and commercial terms. And you should remember the specific context. Villages in the Côte d'Ibon, especially Volnay and Pommard, were badly affected between 2012 and 2015. Rain is another timing hazard. Early rain can disrupt flowering and fruit set, lowering yields and causing uneven ripening. Extended rain during the season increases fungal disease pressure. Too much rain just before harvest can lead to dilution because the vine takes up water and it increases the chance of rot. And then the counterpoint. Drought stress has also become a problem in some recent vintages. Hot, dry summers can cause berries to shrivel and even cause vines to shut down completely, halting ripening. Since irrigation is not permitted, water stress is a real concern in hot, dry vintages. Vineyards with higher clay content cope better because the clay retains water. Now we move to topography, because in Burgundy, topography explains quality. Aspect and elevation are among the most critical factors determining style and quality. The Côte d'Or lies on hills oriented north to south at around 200 to 400 meters. Side valleys running more east to west mean the Côte d'Or is not simply east facing. While the main ridge is broadly east facing, there is a range of aspects, including more southeast and even southerly sites. The best sites are mostly found on the mid slope, and there's a precise reason for this. Mid slope sites combine well draining, shallow soils, good sunlight interception, comparative frost protection, and better ripening potential due to their central position. At the very top of the slope, soils can be thin and poor, and the sites are exposed to cooling winds. At the bottom, soils are deeper, and the vineyards are vulnerable to frost. The coolest sites may be planted with aligote or used for Cremant de Bourgogne. Aspects are more varied in the Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais. Some of the best southeast facing slopes in the Côte Chalonnaise are found in Bouzeron and Rouy. In the Mâconnais, the best sites of Puy-Fouissé are typically on south facing slopes. Now, let's talk about soils. In general, vineyard soils are a mixture of limestone and clay, but the proportions vary. The Côte Nui is more dominated by limestone, and the majority of the most highly regarded Pinot Noir come from there. The Côte Bonne has more clay and deeper soils, and the majority of the most highly regarded Chardonnay comes from there. In the Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais, soils are mixed, and soil depth above bedrock varies significantly. Erosion moves soil down slopes, creating thinner soils at higher elevations and deeper soils at the bottom. At the top, there may be too little soil for vines to thrive. At the bottom, drainage is poorer and the deeper clay rich soils are more fertile. Fertility increases vigor, which increases shading, and shading contributes to grapes being less ripe. A direct cause effect chain that explains why position on the slope links to ripeness and quality. Now, grape varieties. Burgundy's narrow lens. For quality wines, this part of Burgundy effectively relies on one variety of each color, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Historically, there was substantial aligote and gamay until the early 20th century. Some well regarded aligote is grown in Bouzeron. Chardonnay is versatile. It buds early, so it can be susceptible to spring frost. It ripens early, which makes it suitable for cool regions. It can produce relatively high yields without loss of quality, but it is prone to grey rot, powdery mildew, millerandage, and grapevine yellows. It can grow in a wide range of soils and climates, but many top quality examples come from limestone clay soils. The style link matters. In cool climates like Burgundy's cooler zones, Chardonnay gives apple, pear, lemon, and lime fruit with whetstone notes, light to medium body and high acidity, Chablis being the reference. In more moderate areas like the Côte d'Or, wines show ripe citrus, melon, and stone fruit, medium to medium plus body with medium plus to high acidity. In good growing seasons, the main challenge can be vigor management. Too much vigor leads to excessive yield and shading, reducing fruit quality and therefore wine quality. Pinot Noir follows similar early bud and early ripening logic, making it suitable for cool climates, but unlike Chardonnay, yields must be limited for quality. Pinot Noir is delicate and prone to millerandage, downy and powdery mildew, botrytis bunch rot, and fan leaf and leaf roll viruses. In warm climates, it ripens too fast, reducing aroma intensity, and berries can shrivel and suffer sunburn. In Burgundy, the typical concern is whether fruit will ripen sufficiently to achieve desired tannin, color, and flavor ripeness. Clonal material is a quiet distinction point. Many clones used in red and white Burgundy come from the Dijon clone families developed at the University of Burgundy. Producers decide whether to plant a single clone for uniform fruit profile or a mix for greater diversity and potentially more disease resistance. Some propagate via mass selection. Now, what does Pinot Noir typically taste like in Burgundy in exam language? Strawberry, raspberry, red cherry flavors. Village wines and above often show light oak derived flavors like smoke and clove. Tannins are low to medium, though Grand Cru wines can have medium plus tannins. Alcohol is medium, acidity high. With bottle age, wines can develop earth, game, and mushroom notes. Now, vineyard management, where Burgundy's detail becomes very examinable. Some vines are pruned using cordon training systems, including cordon de roya, which limits vigor and yields. But the high proportion of old wine can harbor disease. Traditionally, Burgundy uses Guillot, replacement cane pruning with VSP. In recent years, many growers have returned to this and also to a softer cane pruning method known as Poussade Guillot. The logic is specific. It maintains the same root year to year with pruning wounds only on the upper part of the cordon, reducing pruning wounds and aiming to reduce esca and other trunk diseases. It requires skilled workers, but it can help combat trunk disease and it also aids canopy management. Planting density is typically 8,000 to 10,000 vines per hectare, sometimes higher. Denser planting encourages root competition, leading to smaller berries with higher flavor intensity, which is one of the reasons Burgundy can build concentration without relying on big alcohol. Yield management happens through winter pruning and also through debudding before flowering and green harvesting later in the season. Debudding can promote good balance, but it reduces potential yield early. If hail, frost, or fungal disease hits later, the impact on yield becomes drastic because you already sacrificed crop potential. Green harvesting allows assessment of bunch size, shape, and position before sacrificing fruit. And because it happens later, growers can factor in unpredictable weather events like hail. But it can also lead to vine compensation, excessive growth in remaining bunches, and possible dilution. Yield limits also map to Burgundy's hierarchy. In general, maximum yields are moderate for regional appellations and reduce steadily up the pyramid. Organic and biodynamic grape growing has become more popular, especially among leading growers, but the climate makes it challenging. And there's a Burgundy specific complication. Vineyards are often shared, and some organic practices require a minimum area to work effectively, which can create friction between neighbors, using different approaches. Pests and diseases include grape moths, now typically controlled with pheromone capsules, fungal diseases, powdery mildew, downy mildew, botrytis, require canopy management and spraying. Grapevine yellows has prompted vigilant monitoring to restrict spread. Trunk diseases like ESCA are also significant today. Finally, harvest timing. In Burgundy's marginal climate, storms can lead to dilution and fruit damage, so timing is critical. Harvest early and you preserve acidity but risk incomplete ripeness. Harvest late and you may get a softer style but face weather risk. Most fruit is still picked by hand, so workforce availability becomes a major practical consideration. And we end with a D3 level reminder that links directly to the next episodes. Differences between Burgundy's appellations are subtle but consistent. And while natural factors explain some of them, Winemaking decisions can markedly affect style, including new oak choice, batonnage in whites, and the use of whole bunches in reds. And that is the growing environment and grape growing framework for the Côte d'Or, Côte Chalonnaise, and Mâconnais, the foundation you need before we touch classification, winemaking, and the business logic that makes Burgundy Burgundy. I do hope this helps with your prep, and I'll see you in the next episode.